So, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Amanda Brock, and I'm the CEO at Open UK. It's been about a year, I think, since I have been the host of one of these events. So, welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along. I know some of you are not our usual crowd, and it's lovely to see you and have you join us today. Open UK is the body in the UK for the business of open technology, and that's open source software, open hardware, and open data. And it's great to have Ashleigh Monagle come and join us today to talk about an aspect of open data, digital twins. Now, Ashleigh is well known to us at Open UK because, as well as being a digital consultant at Mott MacDonald, she is our lead on digital inclusion, supporting our kids' work. And we're running a kids camp this summer with a 10-episode educational course and e-zine. And Ashleigh is working with us to get the glove kit giveaway, and I'll just show you. That's a mini moo glove kit, like one of these. Oh, you can't see that because of the screen thing. There we go, you can sort of see it. Now, Ashleigh's done a great job for us, but I met Ashleigh a couple of years ago when she was working for Arup, and for one so young, she's had a varied and interesting career that I know she'll talk to you about in a second. For today's session, I will remind you that it's being recorded. I suggest that as we go through, if you put questions in the chat, I'll suggest to Ashleigh not to worry about those, but that we'll pick those up at the end, and I'll coordinate bringing people either putting their videos on or read out the questions if they're feeling a little bit shy, and we'll pick up questions towards the end. Please be aware that you're going to be recorded and your questions will be recorded if you join this call. Now, very briefly, the Future Leaders Group started as a subset of our Legal and Policy Group at Open UK. That group on legal and policy respond to legislation across the UK and Europe, but also look at policy issues like sustainability, cloud computing, and mobile networks, and the move to Open RAN and 5G. So quite a varied remit. And what we realised is that whilst we have great expertise in that group, the group is aging rapidly. I'm part of that rapidly aging group. Many of us are over 40, most of us are over 50, and that's really not the future of this space. So we opened up the Future Leaders Group to both legal and policy people and anybody who is interested in an aspect of this sector or all of it, who would like to come along and join us and learn more. And the group has done some collaborative projects. It's already produced a report on government procurement that has been shared very recently. They have their own meetings and also these weekly training sessions. We had planned actually to do a joint conference last year with Wuthering Bites up in Yorkshire for the group, and that may happen next year as we all start to move around again. So Ashleigh, I'm going to let you explain a little bit more about your own background to everybody. As I said, you're a great asset to Open UK as well as Mott MacDonald, and I really appreciate you coming along to talk to us about something I know little about, actually, digital twins. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda, and thank you for everyone here joining today. So a little bit about me before we get started. So my name is Ashleigh Monagle. I'm a digital transformation consultant at Mott MacDonald. As Amanda said, has worked for a couple of years with Open UK, mainly because my heart is in open data and what we do around that from a security and ethics perspectives, and more trying to promote social good. So as a digital transformation consultant, I try and focus on two main things, the first being data, and then the second being innovation. And digital twins really hits the sweet spot of two of those ideas. I'm going to talk today about digital twins, and forgive me for those that might know already a bit about digital twins, but I will start by explaining kind of what they are, why they're important, and then I'll go into some more kind of practicalities about what you can do in terms of thinking about digital twins, as this is a future leaders call. Rather than saying so much about what you could potentially do, I'm going to emphasize some thinking concepts and ways to think about digital twins in the future, along with some technical concepts, and then also looking at the national agenda for the national digital twin. So I'm just going to share my screen and just let me know if you can see it. So that should be sharing now.
That looks good, Ashleigh.
Thank you. So just a couple of things we're going to start off with today. So I'm first going to look at imagine if, a couple of scenarios to get you interested in the topic of digital twins and thinking about the possibilities that could arise from using them. And then we'll go into why digital twins are important, specifically now. Are they a buzzword? Are they going to stay in the ether for a long time, or what's going to be next? And then where to start, like I said, in terms of practical guidance, technical guidance, and then also what you can do, and then kind of mixing that in with the national agenda. So starting off with some imagine if questions to get you thinking this Friday afternoon. I'm looking at this diagram and I've got a couple of scenarios for you to think about in your head so you can actually see the possibilities that digital twins could have for us in the future. So I'll just kind of read these out so everyone can kind of reflect on them. So imagine if we could predict the flooding levels and the impact it would have on our bridges and roads. This is an example that I'm using from disasters that have happened in the past and the possibilities that digital twins could help us in terms of understanding how we could potentially understand if a bridge is overflowing and whether we would be able to hoist it up to prevent bridges breaking and things like that. The second imagine if is imagine if we could recognize higher levels of carbon in certain areas and be able to redistribute that or reduce that based on understanding the energy efficiency of an area, or where carbon can actually be distributed to a kind of more woodland area. The third here is one that I think people will relate to, especially in terms of COVID, is imagine if we could know how many hospital beds there are in each hospital and assign ambulances accordingly. So again, understanding the assets that are within a hospital, understanding ambulances and the connection between both of them and where to redistribute resources. And lastly, imagine if we could understand why some communities are prosperer over than others, and how do we nurture prosperity in less fortunate communities. So there is obviously a number of different factors that make up a prosperous community, everything from the buildings, the schools, the transport networks that surround them. And it's understanding and having big data on what makes up a great community and how we can use that from a digital twin perspective to impact communities and kind of help them prosper as well. And you can see by the diagram to the side, when we look at digital twins, we think about it in 3 different stages. The first is being data. So how are we gathering up all that data to create insights in terms of how we understand it, how we use AI and machine learning to kind of get the insight and generate information and sort of analytics from bigger data. And then what if we could is all the decisions and imagine ifs that we could potentially do from digital twins. So I hope that kind of piques your interest in the possibilities that digital twins have for us. And I'll go into describing what they are and a bit more of why they're important right now. So as an overview, a digital twin is a representation of a physical asset, process or system that connects with its physical counterpart to optimize value throughout the life cycle. And I'll just flip over to the next page now to show you what this means in a bit of a diagram. So you have a physical twin here. That could be anything from a bus, a building, it could be a whole transport network. And what you really do is that you're able to get data from the physical twin, let's just say from IoT sensory data, that can then be fed back into a digital twin, and that's the data aspect we spoke about before, and from that you're able to build insight and make decisions. Now, in terms of the evolution of digital twins, these decisions are not only able for people to use at their desk and understand what decisions to make, whether they be right or wrong, but the evolution of digital twins is more looking at interventions. So how can a digital twin interact with the physical twin? In the bridge example that I gave earlier, what if it was possible for a bridge to have sensory data which tells you how much water is actually on the bridge? The digital twin was able to get that data and then understand and then interfere back with the physical twin to say we need to lift the bridge up. So that's the kind of intervention side of it that we previously didn't have in terms of simulations. But I wanted to go back and basically explain how far we've come. At the start, I kind of talked about the importance of innovation and how this process has kind of been part of an evolutionary process. And the first digital twin, as the term was coined, was basically this digital twin at NASA. And the main reason for doing this was around safety. And obviously they couldn't go to the moon or do things in the station without sort of affecting the lives of people. So digital twins really started out as a way to help with health and safety. But with the use of big data, they're now becoming even more important in the means of working with AI, machine learning and analytics to produce better outcomes. I've got some examples from today. Whilst I mainly work in the infrastructure sector, I've tried my hardest to pull out two different examples from different industries. The first being from the logistics kind of manufacturing industry is with Ocado, and they've actually got automated warehousing where bots are controlled through their modeling, and that it allows each bot to have its own cell in a time and frequency and has time critical control systems. So all these bots are physical twins, and they're able to interact with the systems and understand Ocado.com to understand where they need to go and where they need to pick up groceries and things like that. The second, potentially more exciting one, if you're a fan of Formula One, is Mercedes Motorsport. And they have said, regardless of Lewis Hamilton's driving, which is really, really good, one of the reasons why they win Formula One quite a lot is because they have a digital twin of the car that Lewis Hamilton drives. And they said that this has been able to help them analyse everything from weather conditions to unique characteristics of every circuit in Formula One and the distance that other potential Formula One cars are away from the driver as well. And that helps them really make decisions fast, because in Formula One you have to make decisions fast and they have to be accurate, and they say that's one of the driving factors as why they've been able to win so many times. The third one we have here is Virtual Singapore. So this is an interesting kind of step up from looking at things in isolation. So we look at Ocado as one company. We look at Mercedes as also one company and one car. And then we look at Virtual Singapore, which is expanding this idea of digital twins from not just looking at a transport system or a building system, but looking at a city-wide digital twin and how everything impacts each other. And I'll talk about this in a bit more detail when we go on to systems thinking and how that relates to digital twins. So I've got some reasons as to why now and why everyone is talking about digital twins and why they're so important. And there's three aspects that I've pulled out in our time that are really important, especially in the UK. So the first one is around disaster prevention. And I use the example not lightly of the Grenfell Tower. And if the Grenfell Tower had something of a black box, similar to what airplanes have, the amount of time it took for the fire brigades to get to Grenfell Tower could have been significantly reduced and possibly save more lives. But that's during the disaster. When we talk about the disaster afterwards, it's more about understanding what buildings also had that cladding on it. So when the disaster happened, no one was able to tell what other buildings had cladding and what other buildings were at risk. If we had a digital twin of all buildings with tags on the cladding that people used, we would be able to identify what buildings were at risk instantly. Instead, that's been a rather manual process, and that's one of the drivers for having a national digital twin. So we're able to identify this a lot better and give councils a better insight into social housing. As Amanda said earlier, I work with Open UK on digital inclusion. So social housing is really, really important to me. And we know that these sort of disasters do happen in areas and towns and cities where minorities are affected and people who are economically disadvantaged are more affected. So this is really important from a social aspect as well. The second thing in terms of why it's so important now is sustainability. So if we looked at virtual Singapore, we know that a lot of different things are connected, from energy systems to transport systems to housing and where we live. So achieving net zero, we know, is a combined effort of everyone and every system that's involved. And if we focus on using digital twins to reach targets of net zero, we're able to understand why we can't, what's affecting it, and how we can make those decisions to change. The examples that I use here are around energy and how we understand the actual demand, consumer services, and evolving technological solutions that could support energy consumption. The third one is around economic recovery. So we're going through a stage this year and off the back of last year where the economy needs to recover from a dramatic downturn. When I talk about economic recovery and what opportunities there might be here in terms of digital twins, I often relate this to open banking and the opportunities that small businesses and consumers had when open banking started. If you think of all the payment services that you use now that you might have not been able to without open banking. And this relates back to what I said previously about innovation. So with access to more data, and with access to greater analytics across different sectors within the UK, we're able to have greater innovation and have that systems thinking approach to what we're doing. And by more business model innovation, it means that consumers should have greater choice. And when consumers have greater choice, economically, that means greater competition. With more data that's available to us, it means that we're able to make better decisions. And as a business, better decisions usually relates to efficiency gains, which again relates back to economic recovery. So they're just three aspects of why digital twins are useful for us today. So disaster prevention, sustainability, and economic recovery. I'm now going to discuss with you some concepts and see how we can link them back to digital twins. So it would be great for people to go away, do a bit of reading on what these things are and how they relate to digital twins, but I'll talk a little bit about them and how I think they affect digital twins and how we need to think about digital twins in the future. So if there's any people with a law background or regulation, they might know the pathetic dot theory, which is essentially a socioeconomic theory of regulation and really considers this idea of cyberspace. And it's basically how the lives of individuals are regulated by four forces. And this is usually through the law, social norms, the market, and architecture, which essentially is the technical infrastructure. And you can see how digital twins could be affected by these different things. If we think of the law, we think of open data and how it's regulated, managed, and ethical. We think of social norms in terms of how businesses work and how things are connected. That also relates to the market. We also think of social norms in the respect of consumers and how they interact with their data, upload their data, and share their data. And then we think of architecture as in the technical infrastructure, but also the physical infrastructure in which we live. So everything is dependent on those four aspects, and it's really important to consider that thinking when you're thinking about constructing digital twins. The second thing, and it relates back to virtual Singapore, is around systems thinking. So systems are basically big dynamic things built for a purpose. So we could say it's the healthcare system or the social housing system. But systems thinking really means understanding systems in the context of their structures, so the institutions in which they sit, the relationships within that system, so how that relates to the stakeholders and the power dynamics, and then also the paradigms, so what kind of cultures and mindsets are involved within that system. When I bring systems thinking up because it's very important to the success of digital twins, specifically around cultures and mindsets. This is an emerging technology and we're saying it can do all these wonderful things. And we know that one of the biggest sort of drawbacks and also pitfalls of creating digital twins is around culture and mindsets. So combining the kind of legal, market and architecture aspect with this systems thinking approach to understand people, as in the culture and mindset, the stakeholders and power dynamics, and also the institutions which support them, whether that be government, business, or academia, is really important. And the third one that I wanted to bring up, and I'll show these in a couple of pictures later for you, is around mission-orientated innovation, which is around using missions to drive national industrial strategy or innovation policy. And it relates back to this systems thinking approach, where we don't just focus on sectors. So telecommunications, for example, we focus on a problem or a solution that everyone's trying to achieve. So whether that be economic recovery, whether that be disaster prevention, or whether it be sustainability. So if we're all trying to achieve a common goal, how can we ensure that the mission that we're trying to achieve and the innovation and the problem that we're trying to solve is not just focused on a sector, but it's something that we can all contribute to. So when you're thinking about digital twins, it's really important to consider these concepts and how they interact with what you're trying to do. These might be relatively new concepts to you, so I just wanted to pause and give you guys a couple of seconds to see what this actually looks like in practice. Pathetic dot theory, very simple. Systems thinking example here of the care system, and you can see how it relates to the community, the school, the home, and everything else involved. So again, the system is about the infrastructure, but also everything else that's around it, and the people and the institutions. And this is an example of mission-orientated innovation, and this is from UCL, the Institute of Innovation and Public Policy. They do some really interesting stuff. Recently did something in Greater Manchester, which I'll happily share the link out after, in terms of a practical project around mission-orientated innovation. One of my favourite reasons for looking at this is because it's around the contribution and collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, which is really important for innovation, especially from a national digital twin perspective. And you can see here how the challenge is climate change, which we're all trying to affect and work towards, and how this contributes from sectors and projects, and how we can work across sectors in a more collaborative way to achieve the goals to meet these challenges. There's one technical concept that always comes up when people are talking about digital twins, and it's interoperability. So I wanted to give a bit more information around what interoperability means and how it can help you develop digital twins better, and also facilitate sharing between different businesses, organizations, or the public sector who have access to digital twins. So interoperability is the extent to which systems and devices can exchange data. That exchange part is very important. And then also how they interpret shared data. So we talked about open data before, and this is what we mean. It's the exchange and sharing of data. So for two systems to be interoperable, they must be able to exchange and subsequently present that data in a way that it can be understood by a user. Now, there's a lot of complex things that go around this, because data is not just received in its raw form, it's all about the context in which information is exchanged, and making sure that two different organizations have the same view of that data set. I'll give you an example of where data has been shared and the data has been correct on both sides, but could actually look conflicting. So at the start of the pandemic, there were two politicians who had two different sets of data, and one person said 200,000 people were sick, and one person said 150 people were sick. But the definition of sick was different between those two parties. So a lot of people thought that one person was wrong and one person was right. Well, in actual fact, they were both right. They had different data sets, and their definition of sick was different. So when we talk about interoperability, we really need to make sure that the organizations that are sharing the data have the same definition of what they're looking at. So and that's when they're exchanging it. And here what I've highlighted is the 4 exchange factors that interoperability really depend on. So the first is predefined context and vocabulary. So that goes back to understanding the definitions, like I said, with the two politicians and using the word sick. The second is around the structural data architecture. And what I mean by that is the data models, structures, and schemas that are shared or understood between parties. The third is around data language. So that what I mean by that is the data formats. And the fourth is around the system. So how data is presented and exchanged through network, computers, and web services. So now we've had a look through the technical guidance and also some thinking concepts to help you with digital twins. I'm going to move on to some practical guidance to share. So if you're thinking about developing digital twins, there's 3 things that stick out for me that I would recommend to people. And the reason why I recommend these 3 is because I see a lot of clients who would come to Mott MacDonald, and the challenges that they have are very common. Nobody is new in this situation at all, and everyone's grappling with the same things. And the advice seems to work with a lot of clients. The first one is establishing a purpose. So a lot of people think that we should be doing digital twins just because it's cool, it's shiny, it's big data, it's analytics. But really understanding the challenge, having that mission-orientated approach is really important. So my first piece of guidance is always establish a purpose and understand the business case, asking why you need a digital twin. Going back to that imagine if, so understanding what questions need answering and how you'll turn those insights into action and benefits. So we really want to focus on strategic goals and challenges, and really understand what data you need to make those decisions and meet those challenges. So understand what data is practical to collect, from where and how, and what is required to manage, store, use, and present it. There's probably so much data in your organization, especially if you've been around a long time, and you might have data from 20, 30 years ago that you think could potentially be valuable. And what organizations really need to evaluate is it going to take more time and effort to clean that data, understand what it is and use it, than the value that it's actually going to achieve in the future. So you really need to establish your purpose and weigh up the ups and downs of doing things like that. The second thing I would say is make a start, however small that is. Digital twins, especially of a system, when we think of the care system or healthcare, can seem like a massive, daunting task. I know the digital twin is a really great aspiration, and we all need to work in pockets of it to make it a part of the community. But it is quite a daunting task. So my biggest piece of advice is make a start, however small. Taking this kind of big bang approach to implement a solution from day one is really, really difficult to pull off, because you want to make sure you have incremental wins and are seeing the value being produced over time rather than right at the end of a long period. So start small, learn as you go, and work out to address key considerations. So over time, you'll understand that the level of detail, quality, and necessary resources will change along with the benefits that you're trying to realize. So what I'm really trying to say there is take an agile approach, phase your development, and work with experts. Constantly learn by doing and keep up momentum by targeting small incremental wins. My last piece of advice is really to collaborate and connect. I hope you've seen that thread and that kind of rhetoric throughout this presentation, as we've spoken about systems thinking and mission orientated, so not being so sector specific. So what I mean by that is your purpose and your benefit will likely be defined by multiple data sets across stakeholders, so your data ecosystem and collaboration is vital. Specialist external support can also help initiate and guide necessary collaborative behaviours. And I'm going to move on to talk about the national agenda, but a resource that they have is the Digital Twin Hub, which is an industry resource providing ground and sort of knowledge sharing for asset owners and operators working in the digital twin space to support innovation and also standardising approaches to development and operating digital twins. So when I spoke before about the technical concepts of interoperability, working with one organisation to another on building that interoperability is a place where the digital twin is trying to help with, especially from a national perspective, and building reference data information frameworks for others to use. So I'll just explain briefly a little bit about the national agenda. I've been working with the Centre for Digital Built Britain on the National Digital Twin Programme for the last 6 months. Particularly, I've been looking at their skills and capability programme, so what digital skills are needed to build digital twins. Happy to catch up with anyone about that who wants to know more about driving capability within the digital twin space and also within the information management space. But the idea and the kind of vision of the national digital twin, taking it up a level from the digital twin focus, is the idea of having a connected ecosystem of digital twins where we can all share data for wider society benefits to make enhanced decision and across the nation's built environment, and that's extending out as well. So people usually say, think of it as the Internet of Infrastructure. So a connected network of systems that are able to speak the same language. So really important having that information management correct across organizations and sharing information consistently and at speed. So I've put up here what is a link to the Digital Twin Hub community. So if you're interested in digital twins and want to hear what other people are doing and want access to resources, it's a free community to join. It's full of really interesting people doing really cool stuff. I shared with you before Ocado, who are also on there if you want to connect with them and understand more about their digital twin journey, and others on there if you have any questions. So thank you all for listening. I'll happily take any questions now.
Ashleigh, thank you very, very much. That was really interesting. Now, I don't know if we've got any other questions from the audience, but please put your hands up or stick them in the chat if we do. Can we get back to your conversation about interoperability and the two politicians at the start of the pandemic? I think that's fascinating. How was it 2,000 versus 100,000?
Yeah, and it was really interesting because both of them weren't wrong. They were both right. It's just they had different data and different definitions on what they were doing. So, but from a public perspective, it looks like the government doesn't know what they're doing when they actually just had different data sets and different definitions of the words.
Yeah, an entirely different conversation, but there is an interesting sort of ethical and moral conversation there about fake news and whether any news is actually accurate or fake. But going back to this idea of a definition and the importance of definitions, I thought that highlighted it beautifully. Interoperability is a really interesting topic and word, and we've just been responding to the European Commission's Interoperability Directive and their update. Slightly unfair because I know you're not a lawyer, but have you, or are you aware if it covers data, and is this interoperability piece around data something that you think we will see laws about, removing the need for people to have to standardize the definition?
So it's an interesting question, and I think it will be a mix of regulation and a mix of grassroots. So in a similar way to how like open banking is now completely regulated, so those standard definitions are completely shared. But at the start, it was more of a community of people writing up the definitions and working together. And I think we're starting to see that within the National Digital Twin Programme and trying to build that community aspect of it as well. But in some cases, if you're trying to move quickly, the quicker the regulation comes in, the more likely the industry is going to follow on. So I think what would be great if we could start seeing was in a lot of government contracts for public sector and private sector, especially within the infrastructure sector, it is to see not necessarily regulation, but contract kind of agreements to say these are the definitions and terms that you need to use, because that could be a nice progression.
Model clauses, standardized model definitions and terms, very interesting. It's really not something I knew about before, and you've made it sound, I'm sure it's not, but you've made it sound much simpler than I expected it to sound, which is always the sign of somebody really knowing about a topic. I know Steve wants to ask you a question. Steve, I don't know if you want to put your video on or just ask the question.
Yeah, I can do. I'm on my phone here. Hey, Ashleigh, great session, by the way. Two quick questions. So is the primary difference, simulation models have been around for quite some time. Is it the primary difference between just running, say, weather simulation patterns versus a digital twin is that ability then to interact and intervene? Is that the primary difference? And then number two is it seems like this would be quite a healthy investment for organizations and for companies and for governments, because you're going to constantly need to monitor and build that data set and manage it and maintain it. So the budgets can be quite staggering to build these, I would imagine.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So your first question on the difference between simulation and digital twins is that it's definitely intervention. And I suppose the evolution has gone from modeling, so a computer simulation that has no interference with the physical, but is able to take data from the physical. So I go and measure a bridge, I put it into the computer, and that's my simulation. Whereas with a digital twin, not only do you have sensory data, so you can get that real-time analytics and feedback from the physical twin, but the interventions is definitely a new part, an aspect of digital twins, which is really interesting from a health and safety perspective. It's very important, especially within the nuclear industry, for example, to not interfere with physical assets, and to have that capability to stand back on a computer and interfere with a physical asset from a health and safety perspective is really important. To answer your second question around investment, I think investment into digital twins could potentially be huge, and it is scary and daunting to try and put so much money into something like that. And that's why I think the power of collaboration and open data and sharing data is really important, because you're able to generate more value. What we're trying to do now, and what I can see in terms of the rhetoric chaining, is that people are starting to see data as an asset and trying to value data in a different way. So rather than valuing the price of your house, or if you work in an organization, your computers, your laptops, how do we then add data to an intangible asset line in your P&L to say this is how much your data is actually worth? There are a couple of companies out there. Amnut, for an example, are a great organization at understanding the value of data and helping organizations to understand that intangible value and map it to become part of a P&L. And I think when organizations are able to do that and sort of show the value as part of their organization, it will become a lot easier to invest. But like I said, start small. It could be a digital twin of a chair or something like that to show the benefits, and then gradually grow out over time. So I don't think there's a need to put millions of pounds into it straight away.
Okay, thank you. By the way, what was the name of that organization that's putting value on data? I missed that. Have you put it in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put a link to them in the chat.
Thanks.
So Ashleigh, Yari has a question for you about security, and he's pointing out that indeed it can be an issue if the digital twin is hacked, and then it can change the physical world, interestingly. I can imagine that making digital twin is super important, but that's the same with any control systems. Do you have any comments about security in digital twins?
Yeah, so security is a massive concern, especially when we look at the national digital twin. And when we talk about security, we say secure by design is the approach, but also talk about security mindedness, and that everyone in your organization needs to be aware of different security things going on, whether that be things like phishing, all the way up to interaction and malware and things like that. So it's almost, I'd say security mindedness is like the new digital literacy, right? A couple of years ago, we were saying everyone needs these basic levels of literacy, and now they're saying everyone needs to have security mindedness.
It's possibly even more like data protection and data privacy. They were looking at privacy by design in the same way as you're talking about security by design for business. So I guess that kind of process to security that we applied to privacy, and when we changed our approach a couple of years ago for GDPR, is probably right. It does make me think, and before Yari asked his question about security, I was thinking a bit Black Mirror. Have we ever seen this being applied to a human being? Can you have a digital twin for an individual?
Yeah, so I was actually looking online, and you can see digital representations of humans. Again, the personal privacy and ethical perspective of it is really strange. It reminds me of this idea of like the deep fake, where people are using algorithms to build digital representation. So like Obama, for example, was the first one that came out, where, and it goes back to your point around fake news as well. So how can people use this technology in a way that is responsible and ethical? It should really be at the heart of it. So if data is open and data is shared, the two prime considerations that we really need to think about is the ethical aspect of it and the security aspect of it. Is really important, and that's really built into the design and how you think about things. And that's why when I talked about opportunities, sustainability, disaster prevention, and what was the other one I spoke about? Economic recovery are all things that we can really relate to and things that everyone wants to achieve. So how can we build a common purpose between all of us, and how can that common purpose change our mindset and our culture to be more ethically and security minded?
Yeah, and the last thing that I was sort of thinking about was you quoted Lawrence Lessig's pathetic dot theory, which I, despite being a lawyer, have not looked at before. I thought that was absolutely fascinating, and that's something we could apply in many different contexts. So thank you for introducing a bit more systems thinking as well. I don't think we have any more questions in the chat. Did you want to say anything about the company valuing data? I know you've put it in the chat, or are you? Oh, no, final question from Michael gone. Michael, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, Michael. How are you doing?
Hi there. Yeah, good. Excellent presentation. I think that there's really a lot of real thought-provoking stuff in there. And I think as I was kind of listening to you, just reflecting on the speed of change in this area, and that perhaps we weren't having these discussions maybe even 6 months ago, say, and just really trying to then think about this kind of leadership in this area. And I'd be interested in your thoughts with regards to we're talking about interoperability, transferring data around and connectivity, and we can put a plan together to start connecting systems together. But by the time we've developed that connection, by the time we've gone through procurement and we've started to set that system up, actually another piece of technology and hardware technology and software has come along that can then provide that solution in half the time to a much better standard. So I was just wondering, with regards to kind of leadership of digital twins and strategy, what your thoughts were with regards to building in flexibility and the ability to keep on top of the speed of this change, which, in some areas is quite scary, really.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's a really great question. And as part of the work that we recently done for the Centre for Digital Built Britain, we looked at different skill sets that are really important for this type of activity to happen. And rather than just looking at the digital skills that people need, whether that be information management, whether that be things like UX design, we looked at the business skills that are really important, and transformational leadership came up as one of the top things organizations were looking to have. And the other thing was adaptability. So transformational leadership and adaptability were the two key drivers to help make digital twins a success. Transformational leadership being at every aspect of the organization, not just at your C-suite, but how can there be leadership throughout the organization to take this forward? And then adaptability is, we talk about open data, open software, open hardware, but how can you have that open mindset and the adaptability to change, and also have that awareness of what's going on? So I think skills are really important for this to progress. The other thing is to know, and I think it goes back to that idea of collaboration, to know that everyone is in the same boat, and the only way that we can grow and we can get better is by working together and sort of hearing from one another. So when people go to presentations like these, there's often something that you think, oh, I didn't think about that before, and you make a connection and you speak to someone, and that's how things progress, is just people speaking to each other and sort of keeping up to date with research. So That's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but happy to share the work from the skills work that we've done with the Centre for Digital Built Britain on those skills that are useful, and how we can sort of implement digital leaders in the future.
Interesting point there, Ashleigh, from Michael about the time that procurement takes. And one of the areas we're seeing a lot of success in open source software businesses is providing data tools. And it's partly that they gain traction rapidly because you don't have to go through that procurement process to be able to use the software. And it's one of the big advantages that open source companies always have in their early stages, building ubiquity, building scale through the availability on the likes of GitHub. And we're really seeing a big adoption. And I wonder how much of that is just down to what Michael's suggesting there.
Yeah, and I think another aspect of it is policy and policymakers and how they're keeping up to date with all of this stuff. I think businesses can do so much, but if we go back to that pathetic dot theory, you're constrained by the law as well. So you'd sit in the market as a business, but you're constrained by the law and what the law is doing. And policymakers throughout history can be quite reactive rather than proactive. And I think the government and policymakers need to be as proactive and as adaptable and understand the technological change in the same light that businesses do. So having that same approach. So again, I think it's about that public-private sector partnership and the skills shared across both of them.
Yeah, and I think we're hitting a phase in business development where we're going to see just more and more collaboration across the places where people are able to collaborate, where they can differentiate their businesses and sell their services on different aspects. And I think, as you say, we will see an awful lot more collaboration. Ashleigh, that's absolutely brilliant. Did you want to add anything on the valuation of data before we wrap up?
I've just put the link in to AMNUT. They are an organisation I've heard of and worked with, and I've gone to their webinars, so that's how I know them. So I don't know, I can't really speak much about them and what they do, but they do really great webinars on understanding the value of data. So if people are interested in that topic, I would say check out the webinars and follow their thinking, because it's some really great work on how you can make data an asset in your P&L. They don't use the P&L word as such, but I think from a business perspective, it's really keen to hear that and understand investment a little bit better.
Ashleigh, thank you very much for doing this for us today. And over the next few weeks, we're going to shift actually, and we're going to have a West Coast edition late afternoon on Fridays for a few weeks. The next speaker will be Chris Matterman from NASA. And Chris is an open source software lead there in the Jet Propulsion Labs and worked on not so much Perseverance rover as the helicopter that was put on Mars, which ran Linux and open source. So quite an exciting talk at 4:30 next Friday. But Ashleigh, you've definitely given them a hard act to follow. And thank you very much for your time today.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. And thanks everyone for listening. Take care.